The last of the sun bled across the jagged teeth of the Bitterroot Mountains, staining the snow-dusted peaks a deep, sullen crimson. Sheriff Eli Boone stood alone on the narrow ridge, boots sunk into crusted drifts, the brim of his hat tilted against a wind sharp enough to cut leather. The evening smelled of iron and pine sap, the thin air so cold it bit his lungs each time he drew it in. He kept his eyes on the canyon below, where the shadows of the pines lengthened like claws across the frozen creek. Somewhere down there, the men who had taken his brother's life might be moving, and tonight he meant to see them first. The ridge creaked beneath him, old wood and rock shifting under winter's weight. A wolf's cry floated through the dusk, long and mournful, then died against the mountainside. Eli's hand hovered near the worn handle of his Colt. He had spent a year chasing the Kincaid gang from one state line to the next, following rumors that dissolved like smoke. Each trail ended in silence, and each night he lay awake with the same memory, sharp as the wind. Caleb's voice calling his name just before the world went dark. It had been a late summer afternoon when the news first found him. He was patrolling the far edge of Dry Creek, the smell of wild sage thick in the heat, when a ranch boy came tearing over the hills, face pale as chalk. "Sheriff," the boy gasped. They hit the freight station. "Your brother." He hadn't finished. Eli had ridden hard, dust blinding his eyes, only to find the station reduced to splintered wood and silence. Caleb lay in the shade of a toppled beam, his shirt soaked through with blood, eyes fixed on the endless blue above. The Kincaids had left their mark in the emptiness, a trail of spent cartridges and a mocking scrap of paper pinned to a post with a Bowie knife. "Catch us if you can." Eli had knelt in that ruin until the sky burned orange and the flies settled. Caleb had been 24, with a crooked smile and a laugh that could cut through any gloom. He'd been a better rider than Eli, a quicker draw too, though he'd never used it for more than contests at the county fair. The memory of that smile haunted Eli more than the sight of the blood. He remembered how Caleb had once said, "You keep the law, Eli. I'll keep the land. Between us, Boone blood will hold this valley." Now half that promise lay in the dust. The months after blurred into a hard, ceaseless ride. Eli hunted leads across Idaho Territory, Montana, even as far as the Dakotas. He questioned drifters, gamblers, broken men who owed the Kincaids favors. Each rumor carried him farther into loneliness. A shadow at a river crossing, a whiskey-stained brag in a saloon, a fleeting campfire on a distant ridge. Sometimes he thought he could smell Caleb's blood on the wind. Sometimes he feared he was chasing ghosts and his own anger more than flesh and bone. Winter had driven him to the Bitterroots. The mountains rose black and silver, their canyons treacherous with ice. Yet he lingered, convinced the gang would use the hidden passes to slip south before spring. His deputy back in Dry Creek had begged him to come home. "Law can't run on vengeance," the young man had said. Eli hadn't answered. He wore the badge still, but the line between sheriff and brother's avenger had thinned until it felt like smoke. He shifted his weight and scanned the valley again. Moonlight silvered the frozen creek, and the scent of snow pressed close. Each sound, twig snap, owl call, seemed sharpened, the world holding its breath. He thought of Caleb's childhood dare to climb the old cottonwood tree until they could see the whole valley. He thought of their mother's quiet pride, the way she'd smoothed Caleb's hair and said, "Look after each other." Eli had sworn he would. Now he swore something darker, that the Kincaids would see justice, whether by rope or bullet. Far below, a faint glimmer moved through the timber. Eli crouched, heart hammering. It might have been a lantern, or only moonlight caught on ice. He waited, every nerve tuned to the night. The wind carried a distant murmur, men's voices, low and rough, threading through the pines. He could almost pick out laughter, the metallic clink of a canteen. His jaw tightened. He imagined their faces. Royce Kincaid, the leader with eyes like black glass, his brothers, all grin and cruelty. He pictured Caleb among them, not as a spirit but as the silent weight behind Eli's steady hand. A gust swept up the ridge, scattering powder across his boots. He thought of the law he'd sworn to uphold, of the line that separated justice from revenge. In the quiet he heard his own pulse, steady as a drumbeat. Maybe he was no longer the man who'd taken the oath in Dry Creek's courthouse, who believed the badge meant something more than a license to kill. Maybe he was something else now, a shadow in the mountains, a man the cold had hardened into iron. Yet beneath the steel a tremor of grief remained, raw and unspent. He remembered Caleb's final words, or what he imagined them to be. Asterisk Eli will come. Asterisk the thought steadied him. If he carried out the law tonight, it would be for Caleb's memory, not his own fury. He whispered a prayer to the dark, asking that his aim hold true, that his heart not turn to stone when the moment came. The lantern glow below brightened, splitting into 3 separate sparks, moving along the creek. Eli's breath misted as he counted them. 1, 2, 3. Exactly the number of men he'd been told remained of the gang. Their horses' hooves thudded faint against the frozen earth, a rhythm echoing in his bones. He touched the brim of his hat in silent promise. Behind him the sky deepened to indigo, stars pricking through like nails in black cloth. The mountains loomed, cold sentinels to the vow he carried. Word had reached him earlier that day from a trapper's boy, breathless and wide-eyed. The Kincaid gang was cutting through Coldwater Pass, heading south before the thaw. It was the first solid trail in months, and the last chance before the snow swallowed everything. Now, as night settled like a cloak, Eli Boone waited in the mountain shadows. The law still rested heavy on his chest, the badge a cold circle of metal, but the memory of his brother burned hotter than the winter wind. He adjusted the brim of his hat, eyes never leaving the moving lights below, and let the darkness close around him like a promise. Dawn seeped into the bitterroots as a pale wash of silver, and Eli Boone moved through the timber like a shadow among shadows. Frost cracked beneath his boots, a brittle whisper that carried too far in the hushed woods. The creek below lay locked in ice, its surface veined with black ribbons where water still slipped beneath. He crouched near the bank, fingertips brushing a shallow imprint in the snow. A boot mark, narrow and sharp at the heel. Recent. He could almost feel the weight of the man who'd left it, smell the faint musk of sweat and leather lingering in the cold. A few yards on, a scrap of leather hung from a branch, a saddle strap, torn clean as if by a sudden snag. Eli rolled it between his fingers. The cut was fresh, the edges stiff but not yet frozen. His pulse quickened. Royce Kincaid's trail had never felt so close. A year of empty rumors, of towns that swallowed answers, had taught him caution, but the sign here was too clear to doubt. The gang was moving south, skirting the ridge toward the passes that opened like crooked doors into Idaho. If he lost them now, winter would bury their tracks until spring, and justice would sink with the snow. He pressed on, every sense sharpened. The air smelled of pine pitch and distant smoke, faint but undeniable. Soon he found it, a dying campfire tucked in a hollow of rock. Ash still breathed a thread of warmth. Eli crouched, running his hand over the charred wood. 3 men, maybe 4, judging by the size of the fire and the scatter of boot prints. The ground told the story, a spilled tin cup, a half-print where someone had kicked snow to smother the last flame. They were moving fast, but not fast enough. The wind shifted and carried the muffled clang of metal. He followed the sound until the forest opened into a narrow clearing. There, hunched beside a weathered mule, a prospector chipped at a frozen vein of quartz. His beard spilled down his chest like smoke-stained wool, and his eyes, when they found Eli, glinted with the wary brightness of a fox. "Morning," Eli said, voice low but firm. The prospector leaned on his pick. "Morning's near gone, stranger." Eli rested a hand on the butt of his Colt. "Seen 3 men ride through? Hard cases, carrying more guns than manners." The old man spat into the snow, the dark stain spreading like ink. "Passed by at first light. Didn't tip their hats, didn't slow their horses. One wore a coat black as crow feathers. Leader, maybe. Headed for the canyon trails." Eli's heart thudded. Cold water. The prospector gave a thin smile. "Only pass worth the trouble this time of year. Storm's rolling in, though. Sky's turning bad." Eli thanked him with a nod and moved on, the warning lingering like a chill deeper than the weather. The horizon to the west had darkened to a bruised purple, clouds piling like siege walls. The smell of snow thickened, heavy and metallic. He pulled his coat tight, mind turning to Caleb again, as it always did when the world grew quiet enough for memory to speak. Caleb at 10, riding bareback along Dry Creek, laughing when the pony bucked. Caleb at 16, eyes bright as he teased Eli about courting the mayor's daughter. The last day they'd spent together, the morning of the freight station robbery, Caleb had asked him to ride along, just for the company. Eli had declined, saying duty called him east to settle a fence dispute. That single choice clawed at him now. Each step on the trail a reminder. If he'd gone, maybe the Kincaids would have thought twice. Maybe Caleb would still be alive. The thought was a cold stone lodged behind his ribs. Snow began to fall as dusk approached, slow flakes at first, then a thicker drift that softened the trees into pale silhouettes. Eli's breath fogged before him. He paused at a bend where the trail split around a stand of spruce. A faint light flickered through the storm, far off but steady. He tightened his grip on the reins and urged his horse forward. The glow belonged to a lonely homestead, a squat ranch house huddled beneath a sagging roof of snow. Smoke trailed from the chimney, a wavering thread in the rising wind. A lantern burned on the porch, casting a weak halo across the drifted yard. Eli dismounted and approached, boots sinking into the powder. The door opened before he could knock. A woman stood framed in the warm lamplight, a shotgun cradled in her arms. She was young, perhaps 30, her face pale from the cold yet resolute. "I'm not looking for trouble," Eli said, tipping his hat. "Name's Boone, sheriff out of Dry Creek." Her eyes flicked to the badge on his chest, then back to his face. "Storm's coming," she said. "Not wise to be out. I'm trailing men who don't care about storms. 3 of them, maybe more. You see riders pass today." She hesitated, then nodded. "Just after dawn. They didn't stop. One looked back when they reached the creek, mean eyes, like he wanted me to know he'd been here." Her voice faltered, but she steadied it. "They followed the canyon road west." "Thank you." Eli studied her a moment, noting the quiet strength in her stance. "Best keep that gun close tonight." She gave a tight nod. "I always do." The door closed behind him, leaving only the howl of wind and the scent of wood smoke fading into the snow. He mounted and pressed on, the storm thickening around him. Darkness gathered fast, the sky a churning slate. Snow stung his cheeks and blurred the trail, yet the signs remained. A broken branch here, a hoof gouge there, each one pulling him forward. Hours passed in a blur of white and shadow. The world narrowed to the hiss of snow and the steady beat of his horse's hooves. He thought of Caleb again, of the warmth of their childhood home, of promises made and broken. Guilt gnawed at him, a steady ache that neither cold nor time could dull. He whispered a fragment of prayer to the storm, half plea, half curse. At last the trees thinned, revealing a sheer wall of granite split by a narrow gap, the entrance to a hidden canyon, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. The wind funneled through like a living thing, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and horse. Eli reined in and dismounted, heart pounding. He crouched at the mouth of the pass, eyes tracing the faint glow of a campfire deeper within. The Kincaid gang had chosen their shelter well. The canyon walls rose steep and slick, a fortress of ice and stone. But the moon, sliding free of the storm clouds, poured a ghostly light over the rocks, revealing narrow ledges and shadowed alcoves. Eli studied every line and hollow, the hunter's patience settling over him like a second skin. He moved silently, testing each step, until he found a perch high above the canyon floor. From there he could see the flicker of their fire, hear the murmur of rough voices carried on the wind. He eased his rifle from its scabbard and lay flat against the stone, the cold biting through his coat. Snow continued to fall, but the moon shone clear, casting silver across the wilderness. Below, the outlaws laughed, their shapes shifting in the firelight. Eli's breath slowed. The long chase, the endless nights, the guilt and the grief. Everything narrowed to this frozen hollow in the mountains. He thought of Caleb's easy grin, the way his brother had trusted him to keep the world safe. He thought of the promise he'd made over a grave of frozen earth. The storm raged beyond the canyon, but inside the moonlight carved every rock with icy precision. Moonlight spilled like quicksilver across the canyon walls, when Eli heard the faint crunch of snow behind him. His fingers tightened on the rifle stock, body coiled for a shot, but a low voice broke the silence before he could turn. "Easy, Sheriff. You'd waste a bullet." A figure stepped from the darkness, long coat dusted with frost, the brim of a battered hat shadowing her face. She moved with a predator's calm, each stride measured, deliberate. When she drew closer, the moon lit a pale scar running from the corner of her left eye down to her jaw, a thin white line that caught the light like a blade. "Name's Mara Quinn," she said, stopping just outside reach. Her voice carried a rasp, the sound of gravel rolled smooth by water. "You've been hunting the Kincaids." Eli rose from his crouch, rifle angled but not raised. "You've been following me." "Watching," she corrected. "You make enough noise to wake the dead. Lucky those men below are drunk on their own courage." He studied her in the cold glow. The duster she wore was worn but well kept, the kind of coat made for miles in bad country. A heavy Colt rested easy on her hip, and the way her hand brushed the grip told him she knew how to use it. "Most folks don't wander these mountains after dark," he said. "Most folks aren't looking for Royce Kincaid," she answered. "And most aren't me." Something in her tone carried both challenge and weariness. Eli lowered the rifle a fraction. "What's your stake in this?" Mara's gaze flicked toward the hidden camp below. "Let's say I've been on their trail longer than you have. Longer than you'd believe." The wind lifted her coat, revealing a leather satchel scarred with old burns. She shifted, and the moon caught a flash of a badge tucked in the inner pocket, an 8-pointed star dulled with age. "Pinkerton." Eli's pulse quickened. "You were an agent," he said. "Once," she replied, her mouth curving in something not quite a smile. "Until the men who hired me decided a dead partner made for cheaper silence. They left me in a rail yard with a bullet in the leg and a price on my head." "By the Kincaids." "By the ones who paid them," she said. "Royce and his brothers were hired muscle. After the job soured, they turned outlaw full-time. I've been following their shadow ever since." Eli weighed her words against the steady beat of his own heartbeat. Trust was a luxury he rarely afforded, but there was a cold truth in her eyes, a quiet fury that mirrored his own. "Why tell me?" "Because you're either the law or a fool," Mara said. "Either way, you'll face them before dawn. I'd rather not watch another man die without a fighting chance." A gust of wind howled through the canyon, scattering snow like shards of glass. Eli tightened his coat and looked to the fire below, the gang's laughter rising faintly through the night. "I aim to bring them in," he said. Mara's brow lifted. "Alive. If the chance is there. And if it isn't." He met her stare. "Then justice finds its own path." For a heartbeat, they stood in the hiss of falling snow, two silhouettes against the pale rock. Finally Mara nodded, a flicker of respect passing between them. "Then we best see what we're up against." They moved together along the ridge, silent as the cold itself. Mara led with uncanny surety, choosing steps that left almost no sound. Eli followed, noting the careful way she scanned the dark, the rifle in her hands an extension of her body. When they reached a jut of stone overlooking the canyon floor, she crouched and gestured for him to do the same. Below, the outlaw camp sprawled in a pocket of shadow. 3 horses shifted restlessly near the fire, their breath pluming white. Royce Kincaid sat with his back to a boulder, black coat gleaming like a crow's wing in the firelight. His brothers flanked him, passing a bottle that caught the glow each time it changed hands. Their laughter was rough and low, a sound of men certain of the night's protection. Mara's whisper barely stirred the air. 2 rifles propped by the fire, another on the far log. They think the canyon walls make them safe. Eli studied the terrain. The ledge where they lay curved down to a narrow draw that opened near the horses. A careful descent could put them within 50 yards before anyone noticed. He felt the old rhythm of pursuit settle in his blood, the sense of inevitability that came when the hunt tightened. "They'll sleep heavy," Mara said, "but we can't wait for dawn. Storm will cover their retreat." Eli glanced at her profile, the scar stark against her skin. "You're no stranger to this work." "I used to believe in badges," she said softly. Thought the law could scrub the rot from men's hearts. Then I learned some hearts aren't rotten, they're hollow. The Kincaids are hollow clear through. He heard the quiet bitterness beneath her words and felt a chord of recognition. Revenge doesn't fill the hollow, he said. Neither does mercy, she replied, eyes fixed on the fire. So which will you choose, Sheriff? He didn't answer. The question had followed him since Caleb's death, a shadow he couldn't outrun. Justice or vengeance? The line between them blurred more with each step he'd taken up these mountains. The presence of this scarred woman, half ally and half mirror, only sharpened the conflict. The wind shifted, carrying a sharp rattle from the rocks behind them. Eli turned in time to see a rattlesnake sliding from a crack in the stone, its scales glinting like wet bronze in the moonlight. It coiled, tail buzzing a dry warning. He froze, hand drifting toward his pistol. Before he could draw, Mara moved. In one fluid motion she raised her revolver, thumbed the hammer, and fired. The shot cracked through the night like a whip. The snake's head vanished in a spray of dust, and silence fell just as swiftly. Below, the outlaw's laughter dimmed, one man pausing to glance into the dark. Then the bottle passed again, and the sound swelled, rough and careless. Mara lowered her gun, smoke curling from the barrel. Couldn't risk it striking, she said evenly. Eli stared at the neat hole in the rock, where the bullet had hit dead center, the snake lying still beside it. The speed of her draw, the precision in the dim light. It was a display of skill as effortless as breathing. He realized that if she had turned the weapon on him, he'd never have left the ridge alive. She holstered the Colt with a smooth twist of her wrist. Now you know what I bring to the table. The moon slid from behind a cloud, bathing them in a cold, unwavering glow. Eli met her eyes and felt the weight of the moment settle over them both. The hunt was no longer his alone. The night, the canyon, and the silent dead beneath the earth bore witness as an uneasy alliance formed in the thin mountain air, poised on the edge of blood and justice. The mountains hid the stars beneath a wall of storm, and the night shrank to a blur of snow and breath. Eli Boone followed Mara Quinn through the frozen dark, the shapes half swallowed by a pre-dawn blizzard that roared like a living beast through Coldwater Pass. Wind clawed at his coat and stung his eyes, but the distant pulse of firelight below guided him onward. Each step down the icy slope was a pact with the void. One slip, and the canyon would swallow him whole. Mara moved with uncanny surety, a phantom carved from shadow and resolve. The hem of her duster snapped in the gale as she raised a gloved hand, signaling for silence. Through the whirling snow they saw the outlaw camp. 3 men huddled close to a dying fire, their silhouettes trembling in the wind. The storm masked every sound except the rush of blood in Eli's ears. He could almost feel Caleb's voice beside him, a whisper urging caution or vengeance. They crept closer, boots sinking soundlessly into drifts. Horses stamped and tossed their heads, restless from the scent of approaching danger. Eli leveled his rifle, breath shallow. Beside him Mara crouched, her face half hidden by the brim of her hat. Her eyes gleamed with a light colder than the snow. A sudden gust split the silence, and a lantern toppled, spilling fire across the camp. One of the Kincaids cursed and sprang to his feet, hand going for his revolver. Eli fired first. The shot cracked like thunder, ricocheting off stone as the man fell. Chaos erupted, gunfire flared, muzzle flashes tearing holes in the storm. Splinters of pine and shards of rock danced in the gale. Eli rolled behind a boulder as bullets whined overhead. The bitter smell of black powder mixed with the iron tang of snow. Horses screamed, rearing against their tethers, eyes wide with terror. He felt the vibration of each shot in his bones, a rhythm as relentless as the storm itself. Mara moved like lightning, twin pistols flashing in the dark. She dropped another outlaw with a shot clean through the chest, then pivoted to drive the third back toward the fire. Her coat whipped like a raven's wing, her face calm amid the roar. Eli caught a glimpse of her profile and thought, not for the first time, that she belonged to this violence the way the mountains belong to the cold. Then Royce Kincaid emerged from the shadows, tall and broad-shouldered, black coat swirling like a storm cloud. His eyes shone with a predatory gleam, and the crooked smile that split his face mirrored the memory of Caleb's, twisted into something cruel. He fired, the bullet sparking off the rock near Eli's head. Boone. Royce's voice cut through the blizzard, deep and mocking. You finally found your courage. Eli stepped from cover, rifle steady. You killed my brother. Royce laughed, the sound swallowed by the wind. Your brother drew first blood. We only finished what he started. A second shot from Royce hissed past, close enough to burn Eli's cheek. Eli answered with one of his own, splintering the log at Royce's feet. The outlaw barely flinched. Behind them, Mara's pistols went silent. She stood frozen, eyes fixed on Royce with a look Eli couldn't name. Something like recognition, no, guilt, flickered across her face. Royce saw it too and grinned wider. Well, if it ain't little Mara, he drawled. Didn't think you had the guts to come back. Eli's stomach turned. You know her. Royce chuckled. She rode with us once. Back before she grew a conscience. Mara's jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. I left when you slaughtered those miners in Red Gap, she said, voice hard. You crossed a line no one comes back from. You didn't mind the gold we took, Royce sneered. Don't pretend you're clean. Eli felt the ground shift beneath him, the storm suddenly a mirror of the turmoil inside. He turned to Mara, searching her face for explanation. Is it true? Her eyes met his, steady despite the wind. I was young, desperate, and blind. I thought justice was a game until they spilled blood I couldn't wash away. I've spent every mile since trying to put it right. The confession hung between them, heavy as the snow-laden air. Eli felt betrayal rise like bile, but beneath it lay understanding. They were both creatures shaped by loss, bound to a past that refused to loosen its grip. Royce raised his gun again, impatience cutting through his grin. Touching, but you're both out of time. The world narrowed to the black circle of the outlaw's barrel. Eli drew a breath that burned like ice and stepped forward, rifle lowered. Royce, he called, voice carrying over the wind. This ends tonight. You can face a rope, or you can draw and die. Royce tilted his head, amusement flickering. Always the lawman, even with blood on your heart. You sure you can pull that trigger for justice, and not revenge? Eli's grip tightened. Caleb's face swam before his eyes. The boy who'd once trusted him to keep the valley safe. He thought of the promise he'd made to his mother, of the badge that pressed cold against his chest. Justice or vengeance? The question loomed as sharp as the storm-driven peaks. Royce moved first, a blur of black and steel. Eli fired in the same breath. The canyon lit with muzzle flash, thunder echoing off the walls. Royce staggered, a crimson bloom spreading across his coat, yet he steadied and raised his revolver again. Before he could fire, Mara stepped from the shadows and shot the weapon from his hand with a single, perfect round. The gun spun into the snow, and Royce collapsed to his knees, clutching his wound. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of falling snow and the ragged breathing of the living. Eli lowered his rifle, but did not look away. Royce glared up, eyes still burning with defiance. Do it, Sheriff, he rasped. End it. Eli stood over him, the storm swirling like judgment. Every thought, every memory of Caleb pressed against the trigger. He could end it now, erase the pain with one final shot. But the weight of the badge anchored his hand. Killing Royce would not bring Caleb back. It would not cleanse the hollow inside. He stepped back, voice cold and steady. You'll hang. That's justice. Royce spat blood into the snow, a dark smear against the white. You're a fool. Maybe, Eli said, but I'm still the law. Mara watched silently, the wind lifting strands of her hair like black fire. In her eyes he saw both remorse and relief, a reflection of his own turmoil. Together they bound Royce's wound and shackled his hands, the storm easing as if the mountains themselves had exhaled. As they led the outlaw down the pass, the first gray light of dawn seeped through the clouds. The blizzard faded to a soft, endless fall of snowflakes, each one catching the newborn sun. Eli felt the ache of his brother's absence like a scar beneath his heart, but the fire of vengeance had cooled. Justice, fragile and hard-won, was all that remained. Mara walked beside him, silent, her breath mingling with his in the cold morning air. Neither spoke of the past or the blood on their hands. The mountains loomed above, timeless and indifferent, witnesses to a night when law and revenge had balanced on the edge of a trigger, and mercy had prevailed.